Today, we're going to have a brief discussion on some of the concepts in Buddhism that are often misconstrued, and sometimes they're even so wildly misconstrued that they're used as a derogatory term. And the reason why we're going to have this conversation is we are going to have this kind of dialogue of how we can add this as a positive tool or resource in our lives. But I'm not going to dive deep into any one of them. This is going to be a quick overview, and we will have deeper discussions later. But for now, this is going to be just a really quick overview. So the number one is impermanence. And that obviously means to not be permanent. So this is a steadfast of Buddhism, where it's a philosophy and it's something to be recognized on a daily basis. Some people might say that this sounds negative. If you feel it sounds negative, it's probably because you had someone in your life always saying things to you like, oh, enjoy it now, it won't last forever, or some other kind of condescending tone with the words. And the truth is, they were right in the fact that nothing lasts forever. But their tone and their condescending view towards you in saying that and the negativity is probably what made you feel that you want to hold on to things, because someone has made you feel like things will slip through your fingers at any moment. And the reality is just because something isn't permanent doesn't mean it's fleeting. So for instance, if you've ever loved someone in your family or your partner and you've been together for a long time, you know that love can last a very long time. Even sometimes after someone has passed away, the love is still there. So it doesn't mean that something is going to come into your life and good things don't last and you better hold on to it and live in this space of deprivation, because that's not right. But it also means that when you've had bad things happen, you need to remember, if you can, that these things are not permanent. The struggles that you have are not permanent. And this is why a lot of times older people will say to younger people, enjoy it, don't worry about it, these aren't a big deal, these struggles that you're having, which sounds diminishing to someone who's younger, because it feels like someone's not taking you seriously. But the reality is that for the older person, this is something that they've been through and it wasn't permanent. And they know that now. So they have that wisdom. But it's diminishing to you because you are going through it and it's very real and you're not aware of how not permanent it's going to be. You don't know if it's going to be permanent because you've seen people that are struggling who are also older. So does that make sense? So when you have struggles, for the most part, they're not as permanent as you think. They could last a while, but they're not going to be permanent. And good things are also not permanent. So everything does change and nothing does last forever. But this helps us in the real world understand that when beautiful things are happening to us and around us, and that we can see things that are beautiful, we can be very grateful for them. So if you go on a hike and you happen to see a beautiful sight on that hike, you can be in awe in that moment. And at the same time, even though you're sort of taken by surprise how beautiful something is or how enjoyable it is, you can also be intentional and know that it's not permanent. You may even visit that space, that hiking or park or wherever you are, that hiking path many, many times through your life, and it's always going to be beautiful, but it will have elements of change to it. And sometimes that change is just that it gets more crowded. So for instance, I live near a beautiful lake, and I have many memories of going to that lake where there was hardly ever anyone there. And I went there with my family, and it was more secluded. And now there are more developments around me, and there's many more people, even very early in the morning. And there's different setups, places. It's really becoming more commercialized. And so for me, is it the same lake? Yes. But is it a different existence? Is it a different feeling? Absolutely. And part of me has this feeling of, oh, there's so many people here. I wish it were more secluded like it was before, even, 5-10 years ago. But there's this other part where if I just stand back and look, I can sort of just really feel grateful that all of these people are enjoying it the way I did and the way I do. And so when I can see that, then I also can see that for them, this is not something permanent. This might be new to them. Do you see what I'm saying? So when things are not permanent, nothing lasts forever, whether it's something beautiful or whether it's something painful. That's how we can bring it into our lives. Then we have the other philosophy of being unsatisfactory. Let's just call it that. It's actually called unsatisfactoriness, but it's just unsatisfactory. And this has to do with the first noble truth of suffering, that suffering happens, it exists. We just need to acknowledge it. And so if we acknowledge that suffering exists and that things will be unsatisfactory, then we also can understand that as we constantly reach for desires and try to manage the feeling of suffering, of unsatisfactory living, meaning it could be mundane or it could be stressful, whatever it is, if we can acknowledge that that happens, we float through it more. But if we acknowledge only the happiness or the highlight reel of life and everything else we're trying to run from, we're going to spend a lot of time running rather than just letting it pass by. And that, again, goes with things that are permanent and not permanent. Now, this is a biggie, the non-self. People have a really hard time with this one, and maybe you don't, but a lot of people do. If I tell you that who you are is not at all who you think you are, you will probably fight me on that. You will probably say, I beg to differ, because you definitely feel that you are who you are. Just like I'm Michelle, and I am a mom, I'm a grandmother, I have all of these different labels and how people see me, and people, depending on the relationship with me, have different feelings towards me. So my friends think of me very differently than my children or my grandchild. And so if I have all of these labels and how people treat me and how I respond to these different relationships are different, then who am I actually? And I'm not saying that we all don't wear some kind of a mask in different relationships, but and we are who we are as a habit. So generally, you can tell who I am as opposed to someone completely different. You know who I am, and maybe you know the difference between me and your mom, right? Or me and your best friend or your partner. So you understand and you know how to separate people as to how they look, the relationship, their familiarity with you, and so forth. You get all of that. But if we dive deeper, what makes me me and what makes you you? Well, is it the color of my hair? No, because there's a lot of people with this color hair. Is it the way I speak? No, there's a lot of people that speak this way. Is it my height? No, there's a lot of people with this height. And if we keep going deeper and deeper, we're really just a bunch of cells, and cells change all of the time. So the idea of non-self is really that nothing is permanent. And so there is no such thing as a permanent cell or a permanent this or that. So who I am is really a creature of habit and cells of habit, and who you are creatures and cells of habit. And some of it's genetics, and some of it's our lifestyle, and some of it's our actual rituals and habits. But what makes me very, very different from you or someone on another continent really comes down to just a pattern. So everything's in patterns. So I am really who Michelle is just this blob of patterns, and who you are is a blob of patterns. But these patterns can change. Again, nothing is permanent. I can't be you, you can't be me, but at the same time, I can change a little bit about myself. So for instance, there's a non-self, okay? And let's just go with the idea. Let's just pretend that you, if you're on the fence with this, just pretend you get it, because you will probably in a minute. So if I gained 50 pounds and I looked very different, and I cut my hair and I made all these physical changes. I had plastic surgery and I did all these things. Would I still be me? Yes, I would still be me. But I would not be the me that you think I am if I walked past you on the street, if you saw me today and then I did all of these things, and 2 years from now and I walked down the street, you would not know me. But it's not because I'm not myself, but at the same time, am I myself? Is there a non-self? Well, here's the reality. I can make all of those changes, and who I think I am, right? But I'm making all of these changes. So there's no such thing as a permanent self. You can make a lot of changes. Some of them are going to be more physical, but you can change your mindset. You can be Catholic and then be Jewish. You could be Jewish and then be Catholic. You can change your idea on whether you're Democrat or Republican. You can change your philosophy on raising children. You can decide that you don't like a country home. You like a modern home. You can make so many changes in your life that who you were at maybe 12 or 18 or 27 is probably not going to be that similar to who you are at 57 or 87. There are going to be similarities and things that run through your life that are going to be a constant, probably. More because you've decided that it works for you. But if something doesn't work for you anymore, you will probably find an alternative sooner or later. So if all of these things change and we age, let's look at the 87-year-old who now has a whole different set of values and wisdom, and they look very different than their 3-year-old self, right? The 3-year-old is innocent, doesn't have wisdom, looks a certain way. The 87-year-old looks a completely different way. Are they the same exact person? No. There is no sense. There's no sense of self. There is a sense of self, but the idea that they are the same person is impossible. There's a completely different set of cells. So there's no such thing as a self. We're constantly changing, and therefore we have to understand that because there's that changing, we have to understand that there's always something called dependent arising, which is the next philosophy. So the next philosophy is dependent arising, and that's more where we just have to acknowledge that there's going to be opposites and things depend on each other. So I can't say that there's happiness without acknowledging that there is suffering, right? And if there's love, there's got to be hate. Or what is love? If we can't define love by what it is and also by what it is not, then there's no way to support it. So dependent arising or dependent organization, in so many words, is going to be, origination is really that things depend on each other. So for me to have nirvana, which is a sense of enlightenment and a sense of happiness and joy and peace, in order for me to have that, I have to acknowledge that there's something other than nirvana. And I probably will have experienced at least something other than nirvana to know I've reached nirvana. Does that make sense to you? So when we have all of this dependent arising, dependent origination dynamic, that's where a lot of our changes come that create what we think of as the self, which is actually the non-self, which then creates some of that unsatisfactory feeling, which we know is not always permanent. But let's go to the one that really has most people in a pinch, and that is the idea of karma. I hear people saying all of the time things like, oh, karma is going to get you, and things much more derogatory. But karma just means intentional action. And there is this cycle to karma that you could call it rebirth, you can call it whatever you want, but there's a cycle that if we don't break out of the cycle of karma, we're going to repeat the karma. And you can see this a lot in people's lives. For instance, speaking of gaining 50 pounds, if you continue to eat foods that will cause inflammation as well as weight gain, or weight gain, I should say, because inflammation can cause weight gain. So if you have inflammation types of foods, or you're eating foods that are very high in sugar or calorie, and then you're not moving as much, and then you're maybe getting more depressed because of all of this inflammatory food that you're eating, then that's an action. And so you're in a cycle of action. So every single day is a rebirth. Every moment is a rebirth. Every decision is a rebirth. So when you decide to break out of that cycle into a different cycle, you're in a new rebirth. You're in a new cycle. So you can take it literally as a rebirth of, you're going to pass away today and you're going to come back as a snail tomorrow or as another person, whatever. Or you could take it as a cycle, an actual cycle of behavior. And so when you have karma, which we all have, we're all dealing with, if you're in a Zen Buddhist lifestyle, every moment is karmic, then it's up to you to have an intention, because your karma is driven by your intention. So if you say something nice to someone, or in a tone that is very nice, like, hey, that's a nice dress, that's an intention of, you're giving a good intention, a positive intention. You want them to feel good. But if you say the same words and the intention is negative, like, hey, nice dress, like, okay, that's a more negative intention. And you're not really meaning for that person to feel good about themselves. So the intention that we are driven by is part of our karma. And we are in a cycle of whether we want to be in that cycle or karmic hamster wheel or not. And again, this is where our intention of how we make our behaviors can directly affect that dependent arising, where we have a decision. Which way are we going to go? Are we going to go to nirvana, or are we going to go to suffering? Are we going to make a habitual, ritualistic decision that is going to bring us closer to nirvana or closer to suffering in the moment? And then in those moments, how do they build what we think of as self? Because every single time we make a decision, we have an intention whether we like it or not. And so that intention is either going to bring us closer to what we think of as ourself or away from ourselves. Or we're going to put ourselves in positions where we might have a lot of trauma and stress, or we might not have a choice and we might be in trauma and stress. But our karmic actions and our intentions of how we react to those things are going to make a difference. And again, it goes back to, we have to accept that there's going to be a level of suffering, but we also have to know that everything is not permanent. There's a fluid flow to everything. So these are just some of the things that I wanted to bring together. And I want you to understand that all of these are sort of not only tied together, but our karmic intentions are not only tied together, but they're sort of tied to the earth. We're tied to our groundedness. So how do you apply this in your life if you're struggling? If you're sort of going through a reinvention or a reset of your life, is you have to look at all of these different types of philosophies if you are interested in this, and look at these philosophies and how can you not gain control, but be empowered and inspired by them. How can you change a little bit of your karma? Well, you would be driven by different intentions, not just different behaviors, but different intentions. So if your goal is to, say, lose weight, it's not just about do the behaviors to lose the weight. It's about the intention to lose weight for a certain reason. It has to be beyond just a thing you're doing. Because if it's just a thing you're doing, then it's a mindless thing that you're doing. And then it's about judgment. And then it's about suffering. And then it's about the permanent feeling that you think is permanent, I should say, is going to be suffering. And then your non-self, which is going to be constantly flowing and building, is really only building upon all of these less empowered feelings and behaviors and intentions. So overall, it's not going to feel very good. But if your intention is that you want to be healthy and happy, and your intention is to do things that you love and to be inspired and happy, and that you're happy with yourself as you are, knowing that there's going to be changes ahead, that's going to be a domino of different feelings and intentions and behaviors. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, let me know. These are all very, very big topics, and I gave a couple of good examples and a couple of really shaky ones, I admit it. But the bottom line is, I just wanted to give you a quick overview, and we're going to go deeper into these and how they can really help you in the future. But for now, that was just a quick overview. Hope it helped.